Real quick, since they're paying for my time here, I work for Richie May Technology Solutions. I'm the director of cybersecurity services. I lead up our Los Angeles office. I essentially we have two verticals, the financial sectors, we work with a lot of lenders and banks. And then the other piece that I focus on is the entertainment industry, which is really fascinating because you've got these big studios that are pushing down security, almost a level that's similar to government with air gap networks and stuff. And then you have these vendors who are working on content, the movies that you watch from home or in the movie theaters. And they don't want anything to do with security, and they think they are artists, but they want to do what they want to do. And so you've got these two different polar opposites. So that's my day-to-day essentially is working with studios and vendors and implementing security controls so that they can move big amounts of data from the moment it's edited. So it could be on Netflix within a couple of hours, or Hulu, or wherever you're watching streaming content these days, and yet trying to put all these security controls in place with extra hops. So I find it fascinating. I love working that area. But we've got a great team of different security consultants, anywhere from people that were former military and NSA. And then on the commercial side, they've built GRC programs for places like Walmart. So it's a fun team. Prior to that, I did run my own consulting firm in Los Angeles. It was boutique. We did a lot of incident response and pen testing, and the two polar opposites there too. But joined Richie May a couple years ago, and it's been a whole lot of fun since then. So a couple of legal disclaimers before we get started. I'll make these quick. California, where I am, and you've got to check your own state laws or wherever you're doing this in, possibly if your organization spans multiple states. In California, at least, we are a two-party consent state. And what that means is that both parties need to basically know or agree that they are being recorded, eavesdropped on, etc. And so traditionally, we think of a telephone call, right? So when you call into Verizon or AT&T and they say, this call is being recorded for quality assurance, we get that. But there has been some case law, specifically in California, where Google was driving around their Street View cars, and they were trying to geolocate things and do better than GPS. And so what they did was they were sniffing SSIDs, wireless networks, and in doing so, they could pinpoint where you were, and it was a lot better than GPS. And so if they could triangulate, okay, I see this SSID or this wireless network and this one, and they have this signal strength, I know you're within a couple of feet of Starbucks or whatever you're at. And so they were doing that, but part of their protocol, I guess, if the wireless network did not have a password or was unencrypted, I guess, they were sniffing actual packets. And so they got sued. And in that lawsuit, the plaintiffs actually won and Google lost. And they said, yeah, you are essentially wiretapping or eavesdropping. And so what Google was doing with these Street View cars is essentially what I'm going to teach you how to do, sniff traffic. So I bring that up because that is a concern that in a court case, Google lost, and I'm sure they've got great attorneys. It was overturned in appellate court where they said, no, they didn't have a password and they were just driving around, and it's not any special hacking software. It was essentially anyone with a wireless adapter, and Wireshark, a free open source tool, can do this. So no, it's not wireless, or it's not wiretapping. So I just bring that up because there's a couple differences there, and I just want to make sure that you're safe with this. After teaching this at one of the local colleges where I built out some of their InfoSec courses, a student said, I did what you said. I went to my boss, and this is actually at one of the big studios here in Hollywood, and my boss said, okay, well, can you sniff the traffic on our network? Verbal conversation, he starts sniffing traffic. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's no written proof that he had, authorization to do this. His boss probably didn't even have authorization to do that. And this guy could have possibly gone to jail or gotten fired. So I just say, be careful, because some of these tools, while they're incredibly useful for both an offensive and defensive security perspective, and even just IT troubleshooting, you want to make sure that you're not doing this by mistake and possibly collecting data that you shouldn't. Even think about if your organization doesn't have an acceptable use policy that defines that you or the company can collect data and there's no expectation of privacy. Well, what if the consumer brings in their own, your employee brings in their own phone or their tablet, uses the wireless network and checks their bank account or Facebook, and all those should have encryption. But what if they did something with an app that was not encrypted and had some exposure, and you started collecting their bank details, social security numbers, stuff like that? It could get a little bit messy. So Just want to be careful with that. I'm not an attorney, just to pretend to be one. So make sure you know the laws and consult with counsel. And then also Wireshark possibly can be subject to US exportation laws, depending where you travel to. I want to put out there that myself, for Teammate Technology Solutions, ISSA, anyone here that's been hosting this, we're not responsible for any of the misuse of the information. And then certain places that you go to have strict laws around hacking tools, if you will. And for example, Germany, if you take Wireshark or Nmap or some of these tools to Germany and it's just on your laptop, you're not even using them, it's possibly breaking their federal laws. So you just want to be careful with these tools and how you use them. That's all I'm here to say with that. And then some of the, I'm going to call it PCAP files, but essentially what they are full packet captures of a lab environment where I have simulated some type of malicious activity. I provide those to you. It's in the pcap.zip file. They do contain malicious software. Not explicitly, like I didn't put in bankingtrojan.exe in that zip file for you, but they do contain the full transactions, the conversations from start to finish, where I've simulated things where I've clicked on an email or a link and I've downloaded a malicious piece of software, possibly ransomware. And then I have double clicked on it on my desktop of a lab environment. I've executed the malware. It phones home. It does all kinds of evil stuff. And then I stop the capture. And so it's not like you can just double click on things within that PCAP zip file and infect your machine. It's not how it works at all. But I will show you techniques to extract data out of these PCAP files. And by doing that, you could extract these pieces of malware outside of the PCAP file. So it's not something you can easily just accidentally click on and you infect yourself. It's not like that at all. It's safe, but you have the ability to pull that out. And that's why I just want to bring that up, that if it is a work machine, a government machine, you might want to think twice and possibly use a VM instead, and just be careful and not go ahead and start clicking things randomly. There's also, when we get to that part where you are able to extract things out of the full packet captures, I've got a red banner there, and I warn you once again, just be careful with some of this stuff. Okay, so let's dive in here. What are protocol analyzers? Well, they could either be hardware or software based. They're going to capture and analyze signals and data traversing the network. So in wireless network, they're little waves of ones and zeros traversing the airwaves. If you're using a wired network, it could either be light signals or electrical pulses, and either a higher wave's a 1, the lower part of that wave is a 0. And the protocol analyzer is looking at that and then collecting that and making that somewhat useful to you. So it puts that into frames and then packets. And it basically, if you remember the OSI model, it's looking at the encapsulated data that's going across the network, and it allows you to analyze that in interesting ways. So there is a difference between a sniffer and a protocol analyzer, but most tools these days do both. A protocol analyzer would let you look at the files that I gave you, whereas a sniffer would allow you to collect that data. But Wireshark, TCP-dump, all the tools we're going to talk about, they do both these days. All right, so some of the objectives that we're going to have over this two-part series, we're going to learn how to collect network traffic. We're not going to actually collect it because it's I don't know where you're at and if you're on VPN, you might be doing something you shouldn't. So I'll just show you how to collect it, but we're not going to do that as an exercise. We're going to expand your Wireshark knowledge and skills. Someone who's been teaching for the last 5 or 7 years at the college level, at local universities and colleges, I've learned that I used to think, okay, we've got to get everyone to a certain baseline so they can have a C level grade. But I realized pretty quickly that that's not the right approach. So my goal is to take whatever level of knowledge you have. It could be this is the first time you use Wireshark, or it could be that you use Wireshark on a daily basis in your job. I want to take your level of skill and just move you up to the next level. So even if you're a little bit more advanced, we're going to start out basic, but by part 2, we should have some tricks in there that even if you use Wireshark regularly, you say, oh my gosh, this is going to save a lot of time, or this is going to help me out later on. You'll be able to configure custom Wireshark profiles for many different use cases in both offensive and defensive security. You'll be able to add GeoIP information to Wireshark so that you can enrich the data and not just see IP addresses, but actually see countries, cities, states, ASN, organizational information about your traffic. Quickly identify indicators of compromise from the traffic, and then you'll also be able to hunt for malicious network traffic. And I think that last bullet point is important. If you check out SentinelOne's page, I did a webinar with them last week, and we talked about some of the exit strategies for COVID-19 and what we think are going to be issues for different organizations. And one of those things that I brought up towards the end was that I think we need to be doing some threat hunting. I think we've got a lot of these endpoints that have been taken home. We essentially activated our business continuity plans overnight. And by doing so, we really have just opened a can of worms, and we don't know what those endpoints are doing. We didn't have proper time to put in EDR, tune our logs, set new baselines for user behavior analytics. And so what's going to happen is that people took their computers home, their kids played with them. They were distracted because they were, feeding a baby in one hand and then trying to do an email in another, and they click on things. So I think this is going to be the year of breaches. And one way to mitigate that is as soon as we get everything back in the office, or even now, start threat hunting. Look at the network traffic. Even if you're looking at encrypted traffic, I'm going to show you some stuff in part 2 of this workshop where you can analyze encrypted traffic and still get metadata from encrypted traffic to get indicators of compromise. Okay, so let's look at some scenarios. And this came about after DEFCON last year because people said this workshop's awesome. We love it. But one thing that they needed some help with was, well, how did you get these files? You've got all these files in the PCAP files you gave us, but where did they come from? Or how would I have gotten these files in a real world scenario? And so to give some, I guess, background or how you could use some of these skills, this is it, this slide. If you have intrusion detection systems or intrusion prevention systems, for example, like Snort, free, paid, whatever it is, it can alert you. And so you can have these tools capturing traffic on your network. And then when certain alerts pop up from your IDS or IPS, yes, it might be the first time you've actually go back into your IDS since you press the checkbox to enable it. But this is actual use case to go into your IDS and start looking at that stuff. And you see something, I'll come back to the slide, but you see something like this that says, there's a rule set, emerging threat rule set, and it says that there's a generic suspicious post. So data was sent to a web server with a dotted quad IP address with a fake browser. So a couple of things there that raise the hair on the back of your neck, and you say, okay, wait a second, why is my user going to not facebook.com, not google.com, but they're going to an IP address.com, or not .com, but an IP address / something else? That's not regular user behavior. And so you might want to take a look at that. Maybe it's a fake browser. That's suspicious. So these things then point you at a date and time, and then you pivot back over to your PCAPs. Maybe you only have 1 day of retention or 12 hours of retention, but you start looking at your PCAPs then, and you start then isolating things and narrowing down, filtering out the noise, and you start looking for that malicious traffic. You might have some NSM tools. One of my favorites is open source, Security Onion. Doug Berg maintains that. You can download that. And it's got Wireshark built in. It captures traffic by default. It integrates all these different tools for you where you don't have to set it up. And any of you who have used Linux before and tried to integrate tools like Suricata, Bro, Snort, Wireshark, and have them all work together, it's a challenge. And so Security Onion is essentially like Kali Linux, for pen testers, but Security Onion is the blue teamers version of Kali Linux. It's got everything you could want for incident response and threat hunting pre-built and configured for you there. So you can just put that on a span or a mirror port in your network. And from there, it's collecting, alerting, notifying you, giving you dashboards, and you see something that looks really suspicious. And I'll give you a couple more examples here in a few slides. Then you pivot over to a time frame, a slice of time that you've got full traffic, full packets that you've collected, and you start dissecting that. You might say, well, we're concerned with COVID-19 and all the work from home. Our endpoints, we can't trust them anymore. They're no longer trusted devices to come back in. So, and I can't stop them from coming back in. They're our employees. So we want to now assume we've been compromised and start hunting through full packet traffic. We want to look for domains that start with CN from China or TK because those are not maintained well. Or we want to look for domains that were registered in the last 72 hours because that's most of what malware does. We want to look for SSL certificates that are invalid. We want to look for traffic to and from other countries outside the US and then look at that a little bit more. We want to look for unencrypted traffic. You want to start hunting different things. This is a perfect example of things that we can do. You can use tools like Bro or Zeek. So if you don't have the ability to do full traffic capture, because it is resource intensive, it is hard drive intensive, well, you could run Bro or Zeek on your network on a span port, and it's then going to sniff the traffic and create logs for you. So rather than keeping all that data, it's just going to generate specific logs like HTTP logs, file logs, and it's going to parse out information for you there. You could use a tool like SawFelk. Phil Hagen from Red Canary built SawFelk. It's a virtual machine. You can essentially Elastic Stack, but it's got some network-based dashboards for you. You can use that. Your SIM could alert you to stuff, and then you go back to your full traffic, your full packet traffic. And then EDRs. And most of us are using EDRs these days. And if you're not, it's something to look at with all the work from home. Maybe it's a firewall log. So there's many different scenarios of where possibly an alert or something suspicious has come to your attention, and then you pivot over to full traffic analysis. And I think it's not something I would look at. I wouldn't have TCP dump or Wireshark on my screen and just let it fly through 24/7 and try and pinpoint malicious stuff. That's not how I use it. I use it once I have identified something that's possibly malicious on a network. Then I want to take a look at the full traffic, because the full traffic analysis is going to be everything that comes to and from a system or to and from a network, and it's giving me all the details. I may even start with SFlow or NetFlow in my network and look at that and say, wait a second, there's a whole lot of UDP traffic going to my domain controller. SFlow is great and NetFlow is great, but it doesn't give you all the information. We don't know if that is just tons of users logging in and it's a bunch of UDP requests, or it could possibly be a denial of service attack. You don't know unless you look at the full traffic or some more additional information there. Okay, so here's another example of how you could either, if you have that PCAP that I gave you or you've collected for a point in time, you could run it against Bro. Bro, you could also use in real time and just have it running against the network. So this is an example where so you could practice if you want to work on it. If you've got Bro installed, you could take one of these PCAP files that I gave you. You could run it against Bro. So it's just bro-r, which is read the file, and then the file name. And what's going to happen is that once you run Bro against that PCAP file, it is then going to generate a bunch of logs. In this case, you could see it's con log, DHCP log, DNS log, file log, HTTP log, packet filter log, PE log, SSL log, weird.log, X509 log, and then it depends on what traffic it looks at. It may have more or less logs. So you say, that's great. That gave me a bunch of logs. So now let's take a look at files.log. If we cat out files.log, we can see what's in there. If I would have done that, it's got a tremendous amount of information. So I use another tool called BroCut to then only select certain fields, so it doesn't just fly off the end of my screen there. So BroCut lets you pick specific fields like file name and file hash, or file name, file hash, and type of file, or source IP, destination IP, whatever you want from that. And so here's an example. If I use BroCut to kind of filter out some of the noise, we can see that within that PCAP, there was a couple files downloaded. And the most interesting one, there's the first one, a.png, alpha.png. And so if we look at that, we can see the source IP was 50.63.125.1. Destination went to one of my local endpoints, 192.168.22.94. It traveled over my network in HTTP as the protocol. But the interesting thing is it was called a.png, but the file type is application DOS.exe. So it's not really a PNG. It's got the extension type of .png, but it's an actual binary, an executable that's probably malicious. I can't think of any good reason that a developer would say, no, I'm the developer for Facebook. I'm going to go ahead and put our banner and call it banner.png, but it's really going to be an executable that if someone right click, save as, they could download it, and then it's going to actually run some program like Facebook chat. It doesn't make any sense. There's no logical explanation for why that happens other than obfuscation, trying to hide an executable within a picture. Okay, so just a simple example of how some other tools like Bro might help you out with this or give you some type of thing that you want to look into. And if I saw this, I would say, well, this is great. It told me that a file was downloaded. I see the IP addresses. I see that it's malicious, but now I need to go back to that PCAP file that I have there. And I want to go ahead and look at that date and time, or filter out and start looking at that source IP address, destination IP address, and actually see the conversation was, why did this picture get downloaded? What was the request? Where did it come from? Was it an email? Was it a link? What's the domain name? And you then get a full picture when you go back to the PCAP file. So let's talk a little bit then about collecting packets. And I'll try and keep this brief, but it is important because when I started doing a packet analysis, I made the mistake. And so if I made the mistake, other people are making the mistake too, of thinking that you could just plug into a switch and start press start in Wireshark and think that you're collecting everything in your network. So I did that many times. It's like, wow, my computer is, doing a lot of network traffic on this network. And I can also see there's a lot of broadcasts, that seems kind of weird too. What I didn't realize is that when you plug into a switch, each port on that switch is its own collision domain. So if you have a 24 port switch, there's 24 collision domains. And that means that you're not collecting everything. You're collecting things to and from your system. So back in the day when we had hubs, which you don't find that often anymore, they were working on layer 1. And if you plugged in your computer to the first port on that hub, and you've got a server on port 8 of that hub, and you have a message that's supposed to go to the server, well, it's going to send that message out to over the network cable, and it's going to go to the hub. And the hub is then going to send a copy of that packet to port 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, however many ports there are. It's going to send that packet, that piece of or that message to every single port. And then it's going to go over those network cables. It's going to go to every device in the network. The network cards are supposed to look at that, open it up, just like if you were at an apartment building or a house and you get mail every day. You look at your mail and you say, okay, this is addressed to me, I can open it. Now, if it's not addressed to you, it's maybe addressed to a prior tenant or a prior owner of the house, you're not supposed to open that, right? It could be an actual crime. So you're supposed to then put that mail either in the trash or mark return to sender, put that back in, but it's a crime to actually open up someone else's mail that's not addressed to you, or if it's addressed to someone else and you open that up. And so similarly on a network, if that's addressed to someone else, all those other ports, port 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, if the mail goes to those network cards, it looks at it, says not addressed to me, and it discards it. That's what it's supposed to do. But you always have those bad people in the world who then say, well, this is really interesting. It might be a check, or it might be someone's court summons. I'm curious what this is. It's not addressed to me, but I'm going to go ahead and open it and look at what that looks like. Well, that's how that opening mail that's not addressed to you, that's outside the protocol what it's supposed to do. And that's called promiscuous mode. So when your network card is in promiscuous mode, it's opening mail or packets that are not meant or destined to it. So back when we had a hub, that was easy to do because every packet that was meant for anyone would go out every single port. It just floods the network and says, hey, I don't know who this is for. So, if it's for you, open it up. Otherwise, don't open it up. You're not supposed to. With switches, they got a little bit smarter and they said, well, we're going to have a CAM table. And that CAM table is going to memorize or keep track of each MAC address of anything that's plugged in. So if you plugged into port 8 and the server, it's going to have a MAC address. It's going to send that MAC address, or the switch is going to keep track of that MAC address and say, okay, so if there's a letter or a packet destined to that server, I know it's on port 8. And then I send that packet only to port 8 instead of flooding my network. So the downside, though, for packet capture in our case, though, is that unless we are able to intercept every single port or take over those ports or tap into them, if we just plug into one port on a network thinking we're capturing everything, we're really not. We're capturing broadcast messages because that goes to everyone, and we're capturing traffic to and from our system, but we're not going to be able to collect everything on the network. So we have to find some other way of doing that. Fortunately for us, though, wireless networks, 802.11, they introduced one large collision domain again. So they kind of went away from the way that switches did things, and they use a technology called CSMA-CA that avoids collisions, and it tries to make sure that only one person or one device is talking on the network at the time. The main point of that is that if you are on a wireless network and there's not some funky security going on like endpoint isolation or detailed segmentation or stuff like that, most wireless networks like your home network, if you're on wireless, anyone else is on that wireless network, you're able to intercept all traffic to and from their system. So it kind of goes back to the hub model. And then some routers you have the ability to collect traffic on as well. So if we don't have the option of going into the switch or the router and configuring it so that we can collect all the traffic, but we want to, we have a couple other options. You can build your own tap, if you will, like a network tap on the bottom there. So the one that's kind of bouncing in the moment here, I've tried to build this before. It sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. You're basically in a pinch, it's cool. And especially if you're going out to an environment or let's say a branch office and you forgot your taps, and you want to kind of show off to the IT people there, well, you could just say, okay, let me see 4 wall jacks and a network cable. I'll build my own wireless tap, and it looks pretty cool. Not the most reliable, though. So there's some tutorials out there. You can Google DIY taps and figure out how to do that. Some of the times when I've done that though, if it's a voice over IP device that possibly requires more of the cables, it's rebooted the phones and didn't work right. In other cases, it did work. So it's kind of hit or miss there. But I much rather rely on something here that you can find from like the Hacker Warehouse. And it allows you to basically plug it in between two devices. So you're not going to capture everything on the network, but you might see something that's suspicious and you want to capture the network traffic and you don't have the ability to install Wireshark or T-Shark or some of these other tools. So all you would do is you plug in one of these devices between the endpoint you're interested in and the switch or the router or whatever it's in, and you're intercepting all traffic to and from that device. The other one up there, Packet Squirrel by Hack5. These are pretty cool, especially for offensive security people. So if you're a pen tester or red teamer, I don't need a power source for this. I can take my cell phone battery bank, one of those ones you buy at the airport or a gift shop that just has USB power. I plug it in there to give it power. So I don't need to get a power source. I can literally plug or stick that under someone's desk and I've got about 8 hours of usage. I can also then plug in USB, so I don't have to have a computer or some other system. Imagine if you're doing a pen test at a bank. It's a little obvious if I walk in with my laptop and I start Wireshark and I've got all these things flying across my screen and I plug in somewhere, someone's going to call the police or, you know, someone on me there. But if I take a little device here that's super small, I've got a small battery pack attached to it. I've got Velcro or sticky on it, and I've got a little thumb drive the size of my pinky nail. And all I do is when, you know, I'm opening, let's say, a checking account, and I just slap it under the desk and I'm able to then plug into the network there. I've got about 8 hours worth of traffic that I can capture, and it's a very low profile solution. I like these also because if I'm in a data center or someplace where I just don't have access to power, or I'm scared to go look through the rat's nest and plug something in, it's just a nice temporary solution where I can quickly start capturing packets. The disadvantage of those bottom three solutions, though, is that they're all 100 meg options. So if you have a gig circuit, you are possibly missing some of the traffic that, or you're bottlenecking your traffic, especially if you're doing it north-south. So if you plug in one of these devices between, let's say, your core switch and your router, you may be bottlenecking the throughput of your entire network. So you just want to be careful of that. You might want to use the solution like there at the top there, which is like the T, I think it's called a T or Shark Tap or something like that. You can find it on Amazon for about $100, $150. And those allow you to go gig speeds. They also have them for fiber if you want to go that route, but just a few different options there that you might be able to use. Obviously, if you are able to change or do configuration changes to the switches that they have, you've got options of doing things like a span or a mirror port, or if you have access to the firewall, a lot of firewalls allow you to do this as well. And sometimes with the firewalls, you could ship off the network traffic or the packet captures to an FTP server or a file server or something like that as well. So a couple different options of how you can capture it. One more piece of advice. Early in my career as well, I had a client that I was doing a security audit on. I hadn't been in an environment with 10 48 port switches, and I decided to mirror all the ports to a single 100 meg port that I was connected to. And if you could imagine 48 times 10, and all that traffic was then going to one port, I crashed their entire network. So you may not want to just go into your switches tomorrow and do something like this where you configure all those ports to go to you. It could cause some network issues. So think about what VLANs or what ports are interest of you, and maybe just capture that. You're not capturing everything, but try and focus in on what you're interested in or what's most critical to capture so you don't disrupt the operations, because then you're never going to get the opportunity to do full packet capture again. They're just going to say, yeah, we don't support that anymore. So if you do decide to use something like Security Onion, this is just a quick demo of, or not a demo, but a screenshot of what it looks like. It's got a graphical interface. And then on the right-hand side, it shows all the different tools that they build into the software for you. And as of 2019-ish, Doug built in Kibana. So if you work with Elastic Stack, you're familiar with Kibana. And this is interesting because you can now visualize and have graphs for a lot of this stuff rather than just looking at it through IDS or IPS solutions. And so if any of you have seen this before, I normally have a little bit of interaction here. So if you want to post it into the Zoom chat of what this is in the red highlights, I've got a graph here that says connections. So it's the top 10 different ports, destination ports, looking or filtering by the total bytes. And so if you want to go ahead and post it into Zoom chat, what is generally, or what do you see with port 4444? If anyone knows, go ahead and post that in there. And so I'll keep talking in the meantime. And so what you can do here with Kibana is you can see different things like all the file transfers, all the IRC, Kerberos, et cetera, all these different things you can start visualizing from Security Onion. And so I see Hilly went ahead and post that in. Absolutely, Metasploit. So if you're not familiar with Metasploit, it's a penetration testing framework or a hacking framework. And what happens is that you can build these remote access Trojans, these payloads, and I could call it Adobe update.exe. I could call it many different things. I can then deliver that executable to people. So a phishing campaign, a COVID-19 campaign, and say, hey, you've been in contact with someone who's got COVID-19, open up this document and it's got macros or whatever, your imagination there. And if you just set the defaults and you don't configure it, what's going to happen is it's going to use the port 4444. So what this tells me is that they're one of the biggest destination ports here, even more than 443 or 80 or some other ports that I might expect on my network. 4444, it tells me there's a lot of traffic that's going on with a remote shell there. And so that they've never seen port 444 used any other time outside of Metasploit. And most of the time it's people that are a little bit new and they don't remember, or maybe even it's someone's experience, but they just forgot to change that port. You're going to see that. Okay. So in this case, if I saw this, I would say, wait a second, just seeing port 4444, I can assume that someone's got a remote shell on one of my systems. It doesn't tell me the whole picture. I don't know. Look at that. There's 1.5 or 1.9 bytes or megabytes sent to that destination port. What was that? If you've ever used Metasploit, you can upload and download files. You can take screenshots of the user's desktop. You can record their keystrokes. So just seeing that port 444, it's very concerning, but I need more information. I need to know if we need to activate our, get our legal counsel involved because credit card numbers left or social security numbers. This is not enough to tell me. So now I pivot over to essentially Wireshark or the PCAP, and I investigate and say, what exactly happened over port 4444? What was the communication? How long was it for? I need more information, and that's where I'm going to pivot back over. So where are we going to capture? If you go ahead and buy one of those taps and you want to start playing with this, well, where am I going to plug this in? Well, different scenarios, different places. If I have one tap and one place I can only put this tap in, I'm probably going to put it somewhere between my switch and my router, or my router and the internet. I want to see traffic going in and out of my network. And the reason for that is that, yes, there may be some scenarios where someone goes into your office, the janitor plugs into USB drives and steals confidential data. Sure, that's a scenario. But the other 98% of incidents that we take a look at are network-based. So it's ransomware that's delivered over the internet. It's a phishing campaign. It is a bad domain. It is all these different things that happen over the internet. And how does the attacker control the systems? How do they control their zombie machines? How do they exfiltrate data? Well, they have to have a connection in and out of your network. So if I have one spot that I can capture network traffic, I'm going to be missing a whole lot of data. Yes, but I want to see any network that's going in and out of my organization, egress and ingress traffic. That's going to be my number one priority. If I have other options, or if I can't choke my bandwidth because this is only 100 megabit per second tab, and I want to still collect stuff, and my boss said, no, we're running a 5 gig circuit, you cannot put this in front of our internet, then I may want to put it somewhere else around a system I suspect is compromised. So maybe I just tap into the traffic that's going to my crown jewel server, the thing that's got all of our personally identified information, our top secret plans, whatever your organization is focused on, I want to put it there. You are going to miss north-south traffic. What I mean by that is if computer 1's compromised and it spreads ransomware to computer 2, and then that one spreads and infects computer 3, you won't see any of that, right? We're tapping just traffic to and from the server. And if it doesn't have communication with any of those computers, we're not going to see that. But if it does spread to that server, we'll see that. If there's any traffic that is then going in and out of my network and we're able to tap in over at the router area, then I would see how that malware was delivered, and I would see how possibly it is getting instructions, and I may see heartbeats or command and control. So I am able to see some of that stuff. And that's why, again, if I've got a choice, I'm going to put it somewhere around here, between the router and the switch, or the router and the ISP, depending on what your preferences are. So one other thing to consider is that collecting traffic, and this is why a lot of people don't do it. You might, go away. Hopefully you go away after this workshop and think, wow, this is great stuff. We need to start doing this and collect full traffic. Well, the downside is that it is very, very hard drive intensive. So this here is just a small example. It's a plastic surgery company or medical office here in Los Angeles area, and they had 4 employees. And so it's like a doctor, a billing person, and 2 nurses. So they're not sitting there all day pounding away at the keyboard, doing a lot of stuff. It's mostly probably Spotify and, some billing, email, and that's it. The doctor's pretty much seeing patients there. And so in a 1-week period, we looked at how much traffic was going in and out of the network. Again, not around the network from the file servers and other stuff, but just from any endpoint out to the internet and back. And so we saw about 50 gigs in that 1 week. And so if you say, well, I want to have 1 year worth of retention, you need to have 50 gigs times 52 weeks in the year. And that's going to get your 1 year of retention. You might say, that's fine. That's not a whole lot of stuff for a small business. But as you get bigger and you start looking at, wow, we do a gig of traffic a day, or I'm sorry, we do a terabyte of traffic a day times 365 days, that's a lot of terabytes worth of storage we have to have. So, and this is just one sensor in one location. If you want to have a sensor at the edge of your network and then one at your file server, you're going to be building and building and building of how much cost that's going to have. Here's another example, a 1-week period of 7-employee real estate office here in Los Angeles. They were at about 70 gigs, and they're mostly at open houses, showings, things like that. So they're not in the office a whole lot either, but they're creeping up there on 100 gigs per week. Okay, so just something to consider. Maybe you want to have just 1 week retention. I would be fine with that. If I was in an organization and they said, no, it's too costly, we cannot do a year retention of full packet analysis. And I said, that's fine. Can I have a week? Can I have a month? Can I have a day? What can I actually have? And I won't get everything. I'll miss some stuff, especially when we see dwell time. The time from when you're breached to the time you realize you're breached is still around, on average, 80-ish days. External or internal, they've got different numbers of how you're notified, but we're still close to 100 days from the time we're breached till we realize it. So if you can't get that, you might miss some of the critical stuff, but you're still going to be able to hit things like, this machine got ransomware. If this machine got ransomware in my environment, I know it very quickly. And within the last 24 hours, I should be able to look at that window of time and collect relevant information for that incident. So you won't win them all, but you know what? There's no perfect solution. And I still rather have a day or a week worth of retention than nothing at all. And so at that point, then you can dig into it further. Whatever your organization's comfortable with, it's going to vary by organization to organization. So let's take a look at how do we actually capture, and this is specific to Wireshark. If you want to go on your home network where you have authorization and your family member knows, you're going to go ahead and start capturing traffic. When you open up Wireshark, you're just going to go ahead and click on the capture menu option at the top, click on options, and that's going to give you a few different pieces of information you can select from. So you can, if you've got multiple network cards, let's say a wireless card, a wired card, Bluetooth adapter, you can pick on which adapter you want to capture from, one or all even. So if you click on the first one and then you press select and then hold down the shift key and then select a different network adapter, you can select one or more network adapters you're snipping from. It may be a little bit confusing. So I normally just capture from one network adapter. And on my systems, I've got so many virtual machines and virtual adapters, it can sometimes be difficult to tell where the heck am I and which adapter should I sniff from. And so I do like that Wireshark in the last couple of years, you could see in the traffic column, it's got a little bit of a wave. And what that is that it shows you the amount of traffic on that network adapter. So in this case, I can see, oh, okay, great. My Wi-Fi network adapter has got the most traffic. That's probably the one that I'm connected to and I want to capture on. Okay, and then on the output, you've got an output and an options tab here when you're in the capture interface. And those can be helpful in certain scenarios because Wireshark by default, when you start capturing, it is going to sniff everything it can, and it's going to keep that in memory. So it's going to keep it in a buffer until you stop the capture. So if you start Wireshark and you're on a very talkative network and you walk away for coffee, you may come back and Wireshark is non-responding. So in those cases where you've got a lot of traffic or you want to capture a long period of time, you may want to go into the options here and set things like stop the capture after 1 packet or 1,000 packets or 10,000 packets, because Wireshark is a graphical interface and everything's going to RAM and it will crash. I guarantee it'll crash on you when you get large number of packets. Past 10,000 packets, I start seeing some buggy performance. So in those cases, you may want to stop the capture after a certain amount of time, or you might want to, on the output tab, you can create new files. So essentially when it gets to a certain file size, it then creates a new file, and later on you can merge them together or look at each one individually. But playing around with some of these options can be helpful. And then the other thing that I uncheck when I capture is that under the options in name resolution, I uncheck resolve MAC and resolve network address and anything else there. And the reason for that is that if you check those boxes to resolve the MAC address, resolve network names, when you get a packet in Wireshark, it's going to say, well, I need to look this up. And so what it's going to do is your computer is then going to say, hey, I need the name, the host name for this IP address. That's going to then cause more traffic. So every time you see traffic, it's going to generate more traffic, 2-3 times the amount of traffic, and you're going to fill up your files very quickly. So I rather look at that information later on, map an IP address to a host name or a MAC address, rather than have Wireshark go out and be noisier than it needs to be. Okay, one other thing you have here, I want to go back a couple of slides. In the bottom there, so where it says number 3, where it says capture filter for selected interfaces. If you just started Wireshark on the Wi-Fi adapter right now, I click the start button, it's going to sniff everything. Broadcast, ARP, DNS, anything it can see that comes to your network adapter, it's going to then say, that's mine, and collect it. Now, you can use that capture filter, though, to either include or exclude things. So rather than capturing everything, you might say, I'm really not interested in capturing everything. I am more interested in capturing ARP traffic, DNS traffic, whatever your instance is, you can filter that out. So it's great because your files are not going to get so large. The downside is, let's say you're just doing DNS. You say, I want to look at DNS. That's where all malware starts. It's going to have to do a DNS lookup. I'm going to focus on DNS. So you say, just capture DNS traffic. It's running, it's running, it's running, it's running. You pinpoint something, you're like, oh, that looks malicious. You know, there's some funky domain name here that shouldn't be in my network. I want to look into that and dive a little deeper. Why was that query looked up? What information does that map to? You just want to get a bigger picture. Well, too bad you missed that point in time, right? You captured from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, you're capturing, and you saw that network traffic is gone. You can't go back in time and recapture that information. So I warn people about this because it's great to kind of just focus on what you want, but you might be missing some stuff. And I will show you a couple examples of capture filters and how you can get really creative. But if you actually get a hit and you're running this 24/7 and a month into it, all of a sudden it identifies, let's say, heartbleed or command and control activity, it's showing on the screen that command and control activity or whatever you told it to look for, but you missed everything else before and after. Okay, and so the capture filters there on that capture option page, that is a different syntax, and this throws me off even to today. When you do capture filters, it's using the Berkeley packet filter, BPF syntax, and that is the same thing that TCP dump and other tools use. It is a completely different syntax than display filters, which I'll show you in a little bit. So just some examples here. You can, if you're looking for a specific IP address, so any traffic to and from an IP address, you could type in host and then the IP address. If you want to look at all traffic to a specific subnet in your environment, you can use CIDR notation and say net and then provide the CIDR that you're interested in. If you're looking for a specific port, like let's say port 80 or 53, you can type port and the port number. If you're looking even more specific and you say, well, I want just TCP port 53, then you can type TCP port 53. right? And then you can also exclude things. So you might say, I don't want to exclude everything. I'm still interested in things throughout my network. However, ARP or other broadcast traffic is just too noisy. So you can filter or exclude those things out of your capture. So here's some really long examples, but I just want to show you how crazy you can get with some of these capture filters. So if you were looking for blaster worm, or you're looking at some C2 traffic or heartbleed, you could actually build this out. You can Google more of these. These are just examples I found on the internet of how advanced some of these these capture filters can get, so that you're not capturing everything. You could leave Wireshark running for days, weeks, months, because it's not capturing anything unless it is related to heartbleed or blaster worm or whatever you're looking at. So you can get creative in your environment, think outside the box. I just want to show you some advanced ones. Okay, and then some basics here. I'm going to skip over the about. You can read that on your own time. One thing about Wireshark. I love Wireshark. This whole class is about it. However, it's not my only tool. It is great for analyzing traffic. However, it's got some flaws. One, it is not great at capturing traffic because it's a graphical interface. It stores everything in RAM. It's a little clunky when you're capturing stuff. So my preference is I use TCP dump to capture the traffic, and I use Wireshark to analyze the traffic. One thing to be aware of, though, is that Wireshark uses what's called protocol dissectors. And on the right-hand side there, it kind of illustrates that. But essentially, these dissectors will take the ones and zeros, or the hexadecimals traffic that's on your network, and it's going to then parse that raw data. It's going to then apply a dissector based on the type of data it believes the traffic is, and it's going to make it a little bit more human readable with all kinds of different features that we'll dive into a little bit later. The issue, though, with that, and while it's great in most times, is that I know Hillary there in the chat mentioned that port 4444 is for Metasploit. Well, that's the default. You can easily change that, and you should change that if you're ever using Metasploit. I can make my payload phone home on port 53, on port 80, on whatever I want. And so what I'm trying to illustrate there is that when you see port 80, it's not always HTTP traffic. When you see port 443, it's not always HTTPS traffic. When you see port 53, it's not always DNS traffic. There could be other protocols. There could be malware. There could be other things that are using that port and trying to tunnel through those protocols or just using the port number. And so Wireshark at times does incorrectly apply a dissector to what it thinks is possibly HTTP traffic when it's really something else. And I'll show you a couple more examples when we get into the end of this workshop, or at least part one. I'm hoping to get there today. And I'll show you how that can play. So just remember that. Navigation, I'm not going to go into this just due to time, but you've got these in your notes. You could see all the different buttons and what they do and play with that on your own time. I'm going to pause here on the on this slide here, which kind of defines Wireshark in the different areas. I'm going to refer to these quite frequently, excuse me. So the top there where you see the purple and yellow, that's the packet list. That's going to be every packet that Wireshark has in that file. And so in this case, in the bottom right-ish of the screen, I can see that there are 14 packets in this file there, and the total number of packets. And then if you actually look at the packet list, we can see all 14 packets there. And on the far left column, I can see the number from 1 to 14. Those are all the packets that Wireshark captured in that very short period of time. Now, the second row there is the details pane. And the details pane allows you to see, it's not quite one-to-one, but I like to give the analogy of it's almost like looking at the packet. If I click on, let's say, packet 1, then in the details pane, I can dive deeper into that packet, and then I can see things like different layers of the OSI model. And again, it's not a one-to-one map, but you could see the frame or the Ethernet, which is more of like the frame. If I look at Internet Protocol version 3, that's like layer 3 of the OSI model. If I look at Transmission Control Protocol, that's looking at the actual TCP part of the packet. So you can look at the different parts or the different encapsulation pieces of the packet that you're looking at, or the frame that you're looking at. So you can dive and pick where you want of that piece of information. And so you can also, if you could see, it's kind of small there, but the little carrots or the arrows in the details pane on the far left side, you can, and when we play with this, it'll make more sense, but I can just next to Internet Protocol version 4, I could click that arrow and I can then look at all the fields of an IPv4 packet. So I can see the, not the flags, that would be TCP, but I can see the source IP, destination IP, I can see the protocol, I can see the version, I can see the, I mean, just anything in an IP packet, you can see there. Same thing if I click the arrow next to transmission control protocol, I could see the TCP flags, excuse me. I could see, you know, if it's SYN, ACK, et cetera. I could see all this stuff, the length of the packet, ports being used, so you can dive into all that information. Excuse me for a second so I can get some water. Okay. And then in the bottom row there, we see the bytes, the packet bytes. 99% of the time, I minimize that. So you can just drag that that row down and not see that. So you're really mostly looking at the packets list and details pane. The bytes pane is going to show you the hexadecimal and the ASCII of whatever packet you're looking at. And 98% of the time, if you look on the right-hand side there where it shows the bracket X5E @4, you know, asterisk, that kind of stuff, that's what you'll see, and it won't make a lot of sense. So for me, it's not very valuable, and there's only certain cases I'll pull that up. Okay, so now we've got those sections. Let's talk a little bit about Wireshark saving and exporting here. So once we have captured packets, it's in memory, it's in a buffer, and so we need to actually save that. And so we've got multiple different options. If we click on File and Save As, we can then save it as, I keep calling it a PCAP, and I apologize, it's just a little bit old school. When your default save in Wireshark is now PCAP NG for next generation, and most tools accept that. But if it doesn't, you can go back to PCAP, you can save it as a text file, CSV, whatever you want. But most network analysis tools are going to want PCAP or PCAP NG as the file type. You can also export. And so this is really useful, the export feature in Wireshark, because rather than saving everything, let's say you do a packet capture and you've got 10,000 packets and you're giving it to a security analyst with a little less experience. You don't want to give them 10,000 packets and try and have them figure out what you're talking about. You might want to narrow in on 10 packets or 20 packets that are relevant to what you're talking about. And so you can go to File, Export Specified Packets, and that allows you to, if you would have done a display filter, so in the top left there where I've got that red box that says TCP.port = 80, I am taking the 10,000 packets that I have in this PCAP file. I am saying narrow that down, only show me TCP packets that are destined, or the source or destination is port 80. And that is then going to give me far less packets. And then I can go do File, Export Specified Packets. When I do that, you've got that little grid there. So in the packet range, you have all packets, selected packets, or you have captured packets and displayed packets. And it's almost like a grid, like a matrix. And you can pick, well, I want all packets that are visible, but only the displayed ones. So it goes from 4,000, I can see there's 4,092 packets in this PCAP file. But when I did that display filter of TCP.port = 80, there's only now 37 packets. So if I do all packets displayed, I now only have 37 packets to give to my analyst, and they can look at that. Likewise, though, I could do a range. I could select packet, let's say 122, press the Shift key and click on 124, and that would then give me those 3 packets, and then I could just say those selected packets. So it gives you a little bit of a grid to pick which packets you want to export out, and that really helps narrow it down. You'll see on some of the first labs, I did that for you. So I'm on my home network where who knows what's going on in IoT devices, and I captured maybe 4,000 packets, but I really wanted to show you ping, or I wanted to show you DNS, and so I can then extract just what's relevant to you in your scenario. The other cool thing is that you'll probably never use this, but I just want to point it out. You can also print packets. If you would like to kill trees, this is how to do it. You go to File, Print, and it allows you to print out all the packets. And the use case for this really is around either you have something for HR, or you've got to show packets to maybe in a court case, in a deposition, and you need to print this out because the judge or attorney can't look at Wireshark. You can actually print out the evidence, and it'll print out the actual packets and all the details about the packets. It is incredibly printer heavy, it will, because it expands everything and you don't get just the consolidated view. You're going to actually get every detail of every packet. So one packet might take 1 or 5 pages of paper. And if you have 4,000 packets, you could be using reams and reams of paper. Okay, and so now this is the part that I warned you about of exporting objects out of Wireshark. So this is how you can get in trouble. If there's malicious traffic in the PCAPs I gave you, which there is, they're fine sitting there on your hard drive. If you do this part, you go to File, Export Objects, and you extract things out. This is how you can pull out files, binaries, other things like that from the PCAPs. So what you do is if you have a file opened up in Wireshark and it's got something that it transferred over HTTP or SMB or TFTP, and it's, let's say, a piece of ransomware or even a web page, really anything that's traversing your network in one of those protocols, if you go to File, Export Objects, and then you pick the protocol, it will give you a list of all the files that were traversing in that PCAP. And so what's interesting is that you can even get here, for example, I started Wireshark and I went to ISSA Ventura County back in the day. I thought it was funny because we're a security organization and we didn't have a certificate. So it was HTTP instead of HTTPS. And this, I was able to extract out the page that I visited over a web browser. And now it doesn't look exactly like this because I'm missing some of the images and style sheets, but I was able to pull this out, this object.html, from Wireshark, from a network capture. I can now see what the user was looking at when they were visiting ISSA Ventura County. So the one other thing that is useful, even if you don't extract it to your hard drive, it's interesting to pull this up. And I'll recommend doing this in some of the labs. You go to File, Export Objects, click on HTTP if you see that protocol being used, and you'll get a list there. You don't even have to pull it out, but you could start looking at, okay, wait a second, there's a couple binaries, there's a couple images, wait, there's a JavaScript file, that's unusual. And you can start just seeing those files. Rather than going packet by packet, this gives you a list of any file that was not encrypted in transit that traversed the network during this capture. So it's incredibly useful, even if you don't extract it, but just looking at the list. One word of caution, if you do extract files out, if you're using the Kali Linux virtual machine, when you extract things out, if you extract them one by one, I don't know if they fixed this recent versions of Wireshark, but if you extract a file out, let's call a.png, pretend that's the file there. If you say save that, it will save it as some long random character .png. So you don't see the original file name. However, if you save all objects rather than just one, it then, most of the time, it names them correctly. So I'm not sure what the difference is, but if you want to keep the original name intact, try save all rather than just save one item at a time. Okay, so now let's talk about some Wireshark profiles, and this is where we start, we get into the hands-on, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a demo here as well. So Wireshark profiles, you've got a couple there by default. I'm just going to go to the next slide, and I'll come back to this. On the bottom right corner there, in the bottom right corner of actually all Wireshark, you've got profile that's selected. You should have default, Bluetooth, and Classic. Those come by default when you install Wireshark. Now I've got one there in the bottom right corner. It's called demo-r-hunting. That's one that I created myself. And this is probably one of the most powerful things of Wireshark that it took me a long time to realize. And so the profiles themselves contain all customizations that you'd like, and you can toggle between these profiles at any point in time. So if you're looking at a capture and you see HTTP traffic, you may be interested in things like the host name that the user visited, maybe the user agent string of the client that requested something. You may be interested in files that were downloaded, right? But if you're looking at SMB traffic, that's going to be completely different. You're going to want to see possibly the SMB stream, the version of SMB, file names that were accessed over SMB. There's completely different file or different columns you might be interested in. Similarly with malware analysis or HTTPS, you might want to see the part of the SSL or TLS handshake that doesn't exist for the other protocols. And so rather than having too much information, I can have profiles specific to protocols or to specific to activities like malware analysis, threat hunting, incident response, penetration testing. and I can switch between these protocols very quickly based off of the exact packet that I'm looking at that point in time. So we can have different coloring rules, we can have different columns, we can have all kinds of stuff that's unique to that view. So what I'm going to walk you through here in the first lab that's hands-on is that if I go to, there's a few different ways of doing this. So we're going to start with one. If I go to the edit option at the top of Wireshark, I can go to configuration profiles. From there, you're going to see those defaults of default profile, Bluetooth, and classic profile. You click the plus button. That's going to allow you to create a new profile. You can call it whatever you'd want. For example, there I called it demo-IR hunting. And immediately you are able to use that profile. It's going to copy the settings from the default profile. So you're essentially going to have two default profiles. But once you then select that profile in the bottom right corner of Wireshark, and again, I'll do this in a demo, you are then able to start customizing things. And next time you go back into Wireshark and select that profile of demo-IR hunting or whatever you call it, you now have those specific settings that you can take a look at, or the view that you're looking at. So the default columns that Wireshark has and the default profile, as well as if you create a new profile, you're going to see the packet number, timestamp, source IP, destination IP, protocol, packet length, and information. Now, a couple problems I have with this. One is the timestamp that's set up by default is from the beginning of the capture. So if you look at any packet capture in the default profile, your first packet is going to be 00.000000. I don't know what day or time that was. It doesn't really help me in incident response. The protocol is going to be what the dissector selects. So if it sees port 80, it's probably going to say that's HTTP traffic. Maybe, maybe not. It also may see if it sees port 8080, it may call the protocol HTTP. I don't really know what's included in those dissectors. So there's a few things that I don't like about that default. And the packet length, in most cases, it's a waste of space for me. I don't really care how big the packet length is. Some cases I do care, but a lot of them I don't. So I don't really want to see that. The information column is great, but depending on the protocol, I may want more information or less information. So here's how we kind of adjust that. We're going to first want to switch to the new profile that we're going to create in the lab. We're going to go to edit and then preferences. Once we're in preferences, I'm going to go to the columns, and there we can see all the columns that were created by default. And so I can then press the plus button and I can add columns. I can press the negative button to remove columns, or I can uncheck one of those columns, and that's going to make it not visible, but I have the option to reselect it later on. And that's really my preference, because I may want to remove the length from my view, but there may be some unique scenarios where I want the length to come back, and I don't want to have to go and reconfigure the profile. I just want to redisplay that. So any of those that we don't want, we're going to just uncheck, and we're going to add some other columns. So again, I'm going to demo this, but we're going to add the source port and the destination port to our new profiles that we're going to create. So we can just add those new columns, and we can go through a drop-down list that's not fully inclusive, but it provides some good starting points for us to create those different columns, like source port unresolved, destination port unresolved, and we'll have those port numbers in our profile. We're then going to go ahead and go to view, time display format, and we're going to adjust the time of display format to be UTC, because we're in different time zones, and we may have offices in different time zones. And if you ever looked at the way that the offsets are between New York, Sydney, London, Los Angeles over a 9-month period, there's somewhere between like 12 and 19 time changes that happen between those different places. So it's critical that we're looking at a standard time. So we're going to do UTC, date and time. And then we're going to forget about milliseconds, and we're going to focus on seconds. So we're going to select the seconds there. One thing that drives me crazy is that when we create the new columns that are numeric, it's going to put the port numbers all the way to the right. And when you've got a long port number and short port numbers, it drives me crazy. My OCD goes out the window. So we're going to right click on the columns and say align left. So we have everything aligned and it looks good and it's easy to review. Okay, and one other piece, and we're at a lab here, and I'm going to demo it before we do the lab, but I want to show you, you might say, well, this is cool. I've got the Kali Linux environment that you set up, but I want this on my work machine. I want to now, we've spent some time building profiles out. How do I get this on my work machine? Well, if you go to the help menu option in Wireshark and go to About Wireshark, then click on the Folders tab, you're going to see a row called Personal Configuration, and it'll give you a file path. If you click on that, it's going to open up Windows Explorer, or in Linux, just whatever set as default, and you're going to see a folder called Profiles. If you go into Profiles, it's going to have all the profiles that we created during this lab environment. So we click on Profiles, we can then see Demo IR Hunting. If I just drag and drop that anywhere else on my Windows system, another environment, I now can share that profile. I can use it. I can back it up, whatever I want there. So I don't have to rebuild these profiles every time I install Wireshark. The other cool thing is that, and I show you this because if you finish this first lab early, I provided profiles for you. So I have built some out for SMB. I've built one out for the IR and hunting. I have built them out for different use cases. I need to update these, but I've given you a few different ones that you can easily add in, so you don't have to create your own. I still want you to create your own, but I want to also show you how you can use other people's profiles and not build it from scratch. Okay. So we're under a lab. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to switch over to my Kali Linux box, and then I'll give you a few minutes to practice this as well. So what you're going to do is you're going to create a new profile called IR Workshop. You're going to remove the length and protocol from the profile that you created. And then you are going to add the columns of source port, destination port. You're going to align those left. You're going to change the time to UTC, and you're going to change it to seconds. Okay. It's going to be 1 second here to switch my view. Okay, I will switch over to, where is it? One more second. For some reason, it's not showing options. Okay, let's try to share this again. There we go. Okay, you should be seeing Kali Linux here. I'm going to log in. And let me kind of minimize a little bit more because I have a large screen. I just want to make sure it's not overly crazy if you're watching this from your phone. Okay, so I'm going to open up Wireshark. And I'm just going to open up a random exercise here, just so I can show you what this looks like. And so we can see that I've got different colors. These can be customized based off the profile. And we could see stuff in here that, so there's different protocols. And for example, DHCP, I might want to know what the MAC address was. I want to start, or what the host name of a machine was. And so all that stuff you can customize here. And now if I, in the bottom right corner, if I click on this default here, we could see I've been doing quite a bit here, but I've got different profiles. You can see SMB. Look at this. I've now got a stream number. I've got response time for SMB. All these things are very specific to SMB traffic. I've got tree, file names, so I can sort by file names. I can do all kinds of stuff here, right? And we can even see that if I switch, I make things larger. So I'm going to do Control+ and make the font bigger. If I switch back to my default profile, the font changes back. So even the font is specific to a profile. We can get really granular there. So up here, again, I've got my packet list. Down here, I've got in the details pane, I'm going to make this a little bigger. We can see specific rows based off of the protocol I'm looking at. So see how I have bootstrap protocol? If I click down, I'm going to go down further. We could see maybe here's some HTTP traffic. I've got now transmission protocol, and I can expand these out and I can get more details. So if I want to see, you know, the stream index number or the source port, destination port, all this information there is specific to this protocol. And so it's kind of cool that you could get details there. And then I do have the bytes pane at the bottom. And as you can see, this is a little bit kind of pointless at the moment. I don't really get any use out of that. So I generally just drag this down. Okay, so let me go and do the steps of the lab. So it says create a new profile called IR Workshop. So I'm going to go here to edit, configuration profiles. I'm going to go ahead and add one here. I'm going to call it IR Workshop MI. Click OK. I now have that in my list in the bottom right corner here. Oops, my VM's a little bit slow. Give me 1 second. Okay, so now I've got the options to switch between them. I'm going to make sure I've selected the IR Workshop MI, the new one that we just created. I'm just personally going to drag this bytes pane down just so you've got a better view. And I'm going to just press Control Plus just so you have a better view looking at this remotely. Okay, so the first, step number 2 now is to remove columns of length and protocol. So there's 2 different ways of doing it. I'm going to show you both of them right here. So for protocol here, I'm just going to right click on the column that says protocol. And I am going to then uncheck it here and it disappears. The other way of doing this is if I go to edit, drop down to preferences, then go to columns. I can also see that length here. I can uncheck length and that should make it disappear once I press OK as well. Likewise, I could press this negative button and it would completely delete it, but I don't want to do that at the moment. And so then I'm asking you to add columns, source port and destination port. So I'm going to press this plus button and I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it SRC underscore port. And in the type column here, I'm going to click on this and I'm going to go to source port unresolved. Unresolved just means it's not going to try and resolve that to HTTP or the name of the protocol. It's just going to give me the unresolved. It's not going to look anything up. It's just going to say port 80, port 443, whatever it is. Okay, so source port unresolved. I'm now going to check or press the plus button again. I'm going to do destination port, DST underscore port. I'm going to change the type to destination port unresolved. Okay, and then it's going to put this at the end after info. And so I don't like that it's there. I like to see source IP address, then destination, source IP address, source port, destination IP address, destination port. So you can drag these. I can just click on source port and just drag it up between source and destination. And then I can take destination port and drag that between destination and protocol. And then it's going to give me that in the same view when I click OK. Now, one other thing, I'm just going to rename source and destination just so it's not confusing, SRC IP. So I know it's an IP address, and then destination, I'm going to call it DST underscore IP, just so they match my naming convention here. Okay, and now as soon as I press OK, we're going to see that change take place here. So now I've got the number of the packet, then I have the time as a column, source IP, source port, destination IP, destination port. Now this is what I was saying. See how it's a little bit weird with the source port and it's kind of commingled with the destination IP. It's a little hard for me to read that it's port 500004 and then the IP address is 171.230.181. So this is a little bit confusing for me. So what I do is I right click on source port column and I say align left. This then pushes that, so I've got a little bit more breathing room here and I can see that it is its own column. Same thing for destination port. I'm going to right click on the column, align left, and I've got a better view here in my opinion. Okay, now I am going to change the time. So as we can see here, if I go all the way to the top, my first packet is 0.00000, and then we can see this is all milliseconds since the first packet. Doesn't help me instant response. What year was this? What month? What day? What am I looking at in this case? How can I correlate this with my logs? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to View, Time Display Format, UTC date and time. Okay, that's great, but then look at the milliseconds. It's way too advanced for me here. It's taking up too much real estate. I don't really care about the millisecond. I want the second. So I'm going to go back to View, Time Display Format, and I'm going to check seconds here. And that just gives me the year, month, day, hour, minute, second. That's a little bit better for me. Hey, so this is my first profile, and the way that we do this, we're going to build a lot more specific protocol-based profiles, but I want to pause here. I'm going to switch back to the slides and let you have a few minutes to work on this yourself. So I am going to mute myself. We should now be seeing my slides again and the steps that I just completed. And I will give you maybe 5-ish minutes. I know I'm in Pacific time, but 3:45. I'll let you go ahead and do that. If you have any questions, please post it in the chat. Otherwise, I'll be just looking at the chat for questions. And give me also on the participants pane, if you can give me a yes, press the yes button if you are done with this lab. So I've got an idea of where we're at. And we'll go ahead and get started here in about 5 minutes. I've got about 5 people who said they're done with the lab. So if you are also done but forgot, please press that yes check mark that's green. That way I've got an idea of where we're all at. And if you need a little bit more time, give you that no, the X, red X. And one other question I came across in chat during the break there was that our profile changes saved automatically. Yes. So as soon as we do anything like make the font bigger or minimize the bytes pane, anything like that will then immediately be saved to that file, the profiles file, and you'll be able to then move that over. So you don't need to press save or do anything like that. The saves are changed instantly. You can close out of Wireshark, come back, it'll be the exact same way. Okay, so for the not getting any more thumbs up or thumbs down as far as where we're at, so I'm going to assume we are sleeping. Okay, someone else said they're done. Great. Seeing all kinds of thumbs up happening. So I think we're good. And if you're not, obviously I'll stay around a few minutes after, but we got about, I think 15 minutes left-ish, if that's right. So I'm going to try and just get through a little bit more here. And that way, questions and stuff like that, we can answer them in a few minutes. Okay, so I think we still see my screen. So I'm going to go to now protocol-specific columns. And so, as I mentioned before, there may be scenarios where we've got, let's say, HTTP traffic or HTTPS traffic or SMB traffic or DHCP traffic, and all of those we may want specific columns for that. And so, in those scenarios, I don't want to have 1,000 columns for every protocol I might come across. I want to look at a packet and then make a decision on which profile I'm looking at. So I'm going to quickly show the slides, and then that'll give you an opportunity to make these 2 profiles for yourself. So if I'm looking at HTTP traffic, and I look at HTTP and HTTPS traffic because that's where I see a lot of stuff happen, right? People are going to websites daily. A lot of malware uses HTTP still. So I heavily focus on these in my threat hunting and incident response. So something I'm interested in is, rather than seeing an IP address, I don't know if you showed me an IP address, I wouldn't know if it belonged to Google or not, unless it was 8.8.8.8. I wouldn't know if it's google.com, if it's Gmail. I wouldn't be able to identify that unless I take that IP address and look it up. Now, if you've got 10,000 packets and let's say 2,000 unique IP addresses, it's not realistic to take each IP address and try and then do a whois or an ERN lookup and figure out who that belongs to. So one thing I like to do when I'm looking at HTTP traffic is I like to have a column designated to the host that someone was looking at. So in this case, I'm going to show you another way to add a column that's a little bit easier, especially when we're talking about some more advanced columns. So what we're going to do is we're going to add that column. It's called host, and you'll be able to see any hosts that were involved in or that there was any traffic to or from. And then for HTTPS traffic, we're going to also then create another profile, and we're going to look at the SSL TLS handshake. And in that, we are then going to be able to, we're not going to see the full traffic. We can't see get, post. We can't see files that we're downloading. We miss a lot of stuff. Our visibility is minimized. But what we are able to get is that in that initial client hello, we are able to see a server name. And so if malware, which it's rare, but I have seen malware use SSL or TLS to encrypt the communication, when that does happen, you will at least see during the client hello the server name they're using. And so if streetcrimes.com is not something that your organization regularly goes to, that may raise a red flag. So we're just looking at different indicators and things that we can take a look at. So I'm going to walk you through this. We are going to create these 2 different profiles. I'm going to switch back over to Kali Linux here. Give me 1 second. I'll do a walkthrough and then give you a few minutes. Hang tight, just trying to move all my windows around. Okay, got that. Okay, so first we're going to create a new profile, and it's going to be called IR HTTP traffic, and then we're going to create another one called IR HTTPS traffic. So I'm going to go back, same thing again, and yes, if you're smart, you're going to go ahead and go into profiles, and you're going to copy the other profile we just made, but I want you to get the repetition. So we're going to do the same thing again. I'm going to go into here to configuration profiles. I'm going to delete these real quick from prior workshops. So now I'm going to create a new one called IR HTTP. And then I'm going to create another one called IR HTTPS. Okay, so I have those two profiles, and the bottom right corner, I can switch between those. Then the next thing is that we're going to remove those columns, the length and protocol, and then we're going to add the source IP, destination IP, but then the unique things are we're going to add user agent string and HTTP host. Okay, so let me switch back over to the new IR HTTP profile. I'm going to Control Plus just to make it bigger for you. I am going to remove protocol and length. So I'm just going to right click, uncheck protocol, and right click, uncheck length. And I'm going to go to edit, preferences, same thing we did before, go to columns. I'm now going to add source underscore port. And I'm going to change the type to source port unresolved. I'm going to create another column called DST underscore port. I'm going to change the type to destination port unresolved. I'm going to move those like we did before. So source IP, then source port, then destination IP, then destination port. This is just my preference. I'm just going to rename this to SRC underscore IP so I can distinguish it. I'm going to rename destination to DST underscore IP. Okay, and so now we've got pretty much the same thing that we saw before. Oops, I forgot to right click on source port and align left, and destination port align left. Okay, so now this is the same as our other profile. This is what I was saying. You could really, technically, you could copy that from the directory I showed you in the past. If you go into help, about, folders, you go to personal configuration, you click on this. This is where all your profiles are stored. So you could easily take like a template here. I've got template, I spelled it wrong. I could copy and paste it, and that way I've got a template to use rather than building this from scratch every time. But like I said, I want you to get the repetition in. So we've got the same profile here again, but now I want to see HTTP traffic. So I'm going to do http.request in the display filter here. And you can see how if I don't type something correctly, it's red. It means that my syntax is wrong. If I type it correct, it's going to turn green, which means my display filter is correct. So in this, I'm looking at a PCAP here, and I've got 9,443 packets in this PCAP. Now, if I press enter here, we now have 76 packets displayed. At the bottom here, it's telling me that. So I've now filtered this down, and this is just HTTP requests. So once I do that, though, the one thing I'm interested in now is creating a column for the host name. So if I minimize this, just so I can see the details pane, I see now I've got hypertext transfer protocol that's specific to this type of traffic, a HTTP request. If I click the arrow here to expand hypertext transfer protocol, I can see things like it's a get or a post or what kind of method it is. I see that the connection's closed. I can see the user agent string. I can see host, etc. If I right click on host, I can then apply as column up here. Once I do that, it's a cheating way of essentially now creating a new column. I didn't have to go through that setup that we did before. And now I can, on this column, I can click on it to sort by domain essentially. So I can see there's some Microsoft, download Windows Update, nails, country, and TAN might be interesting, something I want to look at. Why is there a, here's something that sticks out. Why is there a post? Why is my user sending data to an IP address URL rather than an actual domain name? Grand Rapids nonprofit, that's something I might want to look at. A lot of stuff going to IP addresses. This is unusual, so I want to dig into these a little bit more. A couple of those, right? So this just helps me sort by possibly by domains or URLs that my users are typing. You could also do user agent string. I could right click, apply as column, and that shows me then any outliers potentially when I've got, wait a second, why is there a crypto user agent string? Or why is there Linux or something that's not in my environment usually? I can look at this as a baseline and then identify any outliers. So running real short on time here, but I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to, you know what, actually, I'm going to move on to the next piece here, and then I'll give a break at the end. I'll hang around if anyone wants to, but I want to get through just the GeoIP part. So anyone who has to take off on the top of the hour here, they can leave, but at least they've got a piece of a little bit of homework before part 2 here. Okay, so give me just 1 second to switch back over. back to my slides. Okay, so that's essentially, we're going to do a similar thing, but we're going to do it with HTTPS traffic. And I will kind of stick around if anyone has trouble looking at the TLS traffic there as well. So one thing I just want to mention with GeoIP is that there's nothing built in. So when we see all those IP addresses, it was nice to then, for at least HTTPS requests, where we got a little more information to see what host name was used. However, if we are looking at non-HTTP traffic or HTTPS traffic, we really don't have any more information aside an IP address, which I don't know what IP address maps to what company, organization, city, country to identify any outliers or abnormal traffic. So GeoIP information would be awesome. Unfortunately, it's not there by default. You've got free databases you can use or paid versions. I have a outdated version that's on your VM that I provide to you. So if you use this in the real world, I would go out to MaxMind database and you can get the updated version, but I am giving you here a free outdated version just to have. And what we're going to do is that we're going to take those, the GeoIP zip file I gave you, you're going to extract that. The one thing that's important to remember here is that you want to take the .mmdb files. So when you extract the zip, you're going to have 3 different folders. You're going to have the geolite to ASN, the city and country. You do not want to move those directories into another root directory like GeoIP. You actually want to go into those deeper, and then you want to take the .mmdb files. There's 3 of them in each of those, and you want to then put that in one central directory. So if I went to, for example, C GeoIP on my computer, I'd want to then see all 3 mmdb files there. This is one hang up I see a lot, is that people will extract it. They'll get those 3 different directories, not files, but directories. They'll put that within GeoIP folder and they'll map that, but it just doesn't map right. You need the actual .mmdb files in the parent directory. Okay, and then you're going to go to preferences, name resolutions, MaxMind database directories. You're going to edit the path, add whatever path of the parent directory. So in my case for Windows, I use C GeoIP. On Linux, it's probably already mapped to user share GeoIP, so you won't even need to edit that. But you just want to double check and make sure that it's there and that you put in the geolite2 files, the .mmdb files, in that parent directory. So you'd go ahead and go into preferences, name resolution, you'd edit the directory, you'd add in there whatever directory you're putting that in. Okay, then you may need to restart Wireshark. It's 50-50 whether you will or not. You then can go into the IP version 4 part of the details pane, expand that, and you should then see source or destination GeoIP, depending on which way you're looking at the traffic. You'll see something like this. And you can then, of course, apply any of those as a column. So you could apply the entire thing that says Boardman US ASN 16509 Amazon.com as a column. And there's some use cases for that, but there's other use cases if you want to sort for things like any traffic outside the US or any traffic to or from China. So in that case, you might want to make something more specific like a country code as a column. But you can play with that. It does help to also see the organization, because if I see something in Ireland, I don't know if that's good or bad until I start getting more context and enriching that data to see that, oh, it's in Ireland, but it's AWS or it's Amazon. So therefore it's probably an AWS system that I'm looking at, right? And then you'll be able to see stuff like this. You'll be able to identify, you can, in here in the lab, I give you a little tip, is ways that you can then either sort by GeoIP. So you can sort by country, you can, in the display filter there, I have IP and not IP GeoIP country equals to US. So I'm searching for all traffic that is not in the United States. So anything outside the US. So you'll essentially have this. When we start part 2, I will come back to this and do more of a walkthrough. I'm just going to quickly, with the 1 or 2 minutes that I have left, go back to lab environment and just kind of show you some of those key points here real quick. So give me 1 second. Switch back over to the VM. And so there's 2 pieces to take away, and we'll probably spend a little bit of time on this on part 2 as well. But the part I skipped was creating the HTTPS, the handshake. So I did just want to give you a tip on this as well. 1 second, just to go back. Okay, so the one piece you are going to want to, if you're trying to use the IR HTTPS profile and you want to build the certificate, the server certificate here, what you're going to want to do is type out, give me one more second just so I'm following along your labs. You're going to type out, this is in the slides as well, a display filter of SSL dot handshake dot type equal 1. And you're going to want to open anything with HTTPS traffic. For example, the one I have here is 2017-03-25 traffic analysis exercise. And not everyone, so you see in the info where it says client hello, not every client hello is going to have this. And it's a little bit weird, but when you take a look at this, and I know for sure the first one does not have it, so it's a great example. What you're going to want to do is this is a little bit challenging to dig into, but you're going to dig into the secure socket layer. You're then going to click on TLS 1.2. You're then going to click on handshake protocol client hello. You're then going to find extension server name, expand that. You're then going to see server name, expand that. You're then going to go down and actually see the server name. This is the one you want to make the column. And for some reason, maybe it's the way I'm sorting, I do see that. But if I click to a different packet here, that one, see if I click on the second packet, I don't have server name. It's missing. So you might have to click on a couple of these packets and see this one does have server name here. I'm going to right click on this one, apply as column. And so what this does is allow me to sort by this server name here. And I can see not all the traffic going to and from an encrypted site, but I can see that initial client hello and what the server name was. And this gives me tons of indicators, especially when malware does tend to use, or when it will use SSL or TLS, and they might try and obfuscate what they're doing. You at least get to see the domain name, and now I could do further threat intelligence on this domain name. But this gives me a lot of insight to something that traditionally I'm blind to. So that's the one tip I have there for when you do that lab at home. And then the one other piece about GeoIP info that I wanted to show you, let me just go back to my slides real quick. In the lab that you've got here, you are going to extract the files. So if I just go to my desktop here, in my workshop, Wireshark, GeoIP, I've got these zip files here. And so if I extract them, it's going to create 3 directories. Within each directory, I've got this MMDB file. This is the one you want to copy, and you want to move it over to the parent directory that you're mapping. And so the parent directory that we're mapping, I'm going to go back to Wireshark and show you. If I go to Edit, Preferences, where is it? I always lose my spot here. Name resolution, there it is. And I scroll down to Maxmind database directories. This is the parent location of where you want to put this. And so if I add something here like /USR, share, GeoIP2, or C on a Windows machine, C:/GeoIP, whatever it is, this is where you have to put the .mmdb files. So if I put that there, this is the location that I want to drop everything into. And I would then go over here, minimize this, open up a new window, and locations, computer. I want to go to USR, share, and GeoIP. I think I had GeoIP2. Do I have it here? I'm not going to spend time figuring out where my GeoIP2 is, but this is wherever you put that listing, that directory listing. Come on. This is, you see you have the .mmdb. This is where you want to go ahead and paste in, make sure you've got the 3 different .mmdbs for the country, the ASN, and the city. So once you have those there, you restart Wireshark. And when you restart Wireshark, now if I look into, I expand here, Internet Protocol version 4, see how I have destination GeoIP? This is what I want for GeoIP information. So I can either right click and apply this whole thing as a column, or I can say, no, I just want the 2-letter country code. I can apply that as a column, whatever you'd like. But once you have that as a column here, you can then now sort by this, and you might want to do one for source and one by destination. But now I can see that there's stuff going to other countries here that are outside the US. And if I'm a plastic surgery company in Beverly Hills, why is there all this traffic going outside the US to all these other countries? Here's CN for China, right? This may be something I want to dig into a little bit more. So apologize for going so quick there at the end. I will switch back over here to the slides just so you can see this. I'll hang around for a couple more minutes if anyone else has any questions. I appreciate everyone's time. I know we've got, traditionally this was an 8-hour course, and then DEFCON asked for it to be a 4-hour course, and then others asked for it to be a 3-hour. So I keep shrinking, but there's a lot of stuff in here. So I'll hand it back over to Tristan, and I'll be around a little bit if anyone has questions or wants to dig into it deeper. But otherwise,